So we've been getting the question a lot, when are we going to make a tool for the TR6060 for later model cars, the cars that have non-removable bell housings on the transmission. So we decided to finally make that happen. We've got one for LS-LT, so Gen 4 LS, Gen 3 LS, as well as Gen 5 LT engines. And we've also got what's here in front of me, which is the one for the Coyote engine. And if you guys didn't know, Coyote cars came with TR6060s, MT82s, TR3160s, so they have 3 transmissions with non-removable bell housings. So both kits, the LS-LT and the Coyote kit, are going to come with the same components. The actual measuring target plate is what I like to call it, a pair of spacers, a pair of bolts, and a pair of nuts. And you'll see in the instructional video on how to use these components and in which order. To use this tool as our representation, we just have the bell housing and front plate assembly off of our TR3160 out of the Dark Horse set on the table with the release bearing set down inside of it, and it's our release bearings. We have our lock key installed, that way the bearing is bottomed out, and we're going to just do that so that we can show you how to use this tool on the bell housing side. So just imagine this is sitting on a table, on a floor, on a transmission jack in its normal position, but except we're doing it from this direction just because of the way we have it set on the table. But again, this tool is going to have an arrow, and that arrow signifies how to orient it. It's pretty simple on the Coyote version. We're going to have the Coyote and the LS-LT version, but simply point the arrow up. Obviously it's got this bend in it, so with this bend, it's to basically keep this thing from buckling, or when you put any kind of pressure on it, to keep it from flexing and giving you an inaccurate reading. So obviously with that flange on there, it's got to go a certain way anyway. It's not going to sit on there unless you put it on there in this orientation. So just using 2 of your bell housing bolts that came out of the car, they are 10 by 150 thread pitch metric bolts. So you're just going to slide those through, and then you're going to use the included nuts on that bolt to fasten this in place. You can make sure that it doesn't move on you. So that's all you have to do to set the tool up on the bell housing side, and then you're just simply going to take your caliper and you're going to reach down through your holes and measure down to the face of your tool, just like you would with our other tools. Take your reading. So our reading is 4.792 in this case, and just like with our other tools, you're going to have to do a little bit of math. So our reading 4.792, and our tool is 1/8 of an inch thick, so 125 thousandths. You're going to take your number 4.792 in this case, and you're going to subtract 1/8 inch from that number, and that's going to give you your bearing depth from the face of your transmission. 4.792. We're going to subtract our 1/8 of an inch, giving us a bearing depth of 4.667 inches. So now we can take our tool back off of our bell housing and head over underneath the car and show you how it attaches to the back of the block, so you can get your pressure plate finger depth as well. Alright, so now we're under the car and we're going to do our measurement for the pressure plate levers themselves. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's super simple, super easy, no need in this being overcomplicated. And let's just get right into it. Again, this thing's going to have an arrow indicating that you point up. And when you're on the bell housing side, you're going to use this flat face against the bell housing. And then when you're on the block side, like we are now, the lip or the folded edge is going to point toward the engine or toward the clutch. And the reason, again, for the bend is to keep this thing from flexing when you're actually trying to get your measurements. So we'll go ahead and get it installed. This one is obviously a Coyote engine. It's going to use the lower 2 bolt holes, or the lowermost 2 bolt holes in the block. It's very similar, again, for the LS-LT version. Essentially, all of the instructions will be the same, just simply the way that it bolts up and the shape of the tool is a little bit different. But other than that, everything's going to be the same. So we'll go ahead and get this installed. You're going to put the bolt through the tool and then the spacer over the bolts. I'll show you what that looks like. So just going to insert the bolt through the tool and slide the spacer over, swing it up into position. I do recommend tightening these down. These are 17mm heads, so just give them a little bit of a snug. There's no need in that being super tight or anything because you're not trying to hold anything. All right, so now with our tool installed, we're gonna take our caliper and we're gonna measure our lever depth. And it's just as simple as inserting through one of these holes. You're gonna find one of these holes that lines up best with one of the pressure plate levers, and you're gonna measure to the flattest, most furthest point of the pressure plate lever. Okay, so we're just gonna drop it in. And there we are. So we have our measurement of 1.5885. Okay, so now what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your known distance of your tool, which is 6 inches, and then you're gonna subtract your measurement from that number, and that number is going to be your pressure plate lever height. So the height from the face of the block to the pressure plate lever. So I can just come in here and do my math. 6 inches as the tool, and then we're going to do our subtraction of the 1.5885, and that gives us a number of 4.4115. So that's again how far it is from the block to the fingers of the pressure plate at their furthest point. Now I can write down my measurement and see how much clearance I have. Ready to go again? Yeah. Is he still back there? No, that's all I need. Yes, spacious. Thank you. Appreciate it. The math here is going to be pretty simple. It's going to be your bearing depth from your bell housing face minus the lever depth from the block face. So we're going to take our bearing depth number of 4.667 inches, then we're going to subtract our engine side measurement of 4.4115 inches, and that gives us a clearance of basically 1/4 of an inch, but 0.2555 inches is what our clearance would be with our assembly completely bolted together. And remember, when you're using one of our bearings, we like to recommend being between 100 and 150 thousandths on this gap. So technically we're going to use about 1/8 of an inch shim to get this thing in the window that we recommend. So basically with our 1/4 of an inch gap, what that leaves us with is wanting to add a shim to tighten that gap up. And the main reason for this is so that we can keep that bearing travel away from the end of the release bearing. It's not for any reason other than that. It's just to make sure that that bearing is in a good, nice, usable range, that it's not going to cause any problems over time as it's being used, because naturally as the clutch wears, that gap is actually going to close up anyway. But with the bearing being down toward the base from the get-go, if you end up with some kind of distance number that is wrong or something that seems off, so if you've got a distance of 300, 350, 400 thousandths, the first thing you're going to want to do is double check your math to make sure that you're getting that number, just to be 100% sure that is what you're seeing. And then if it is, maybe double check which parts you have, which release bearing you have, what clutch you have. Make sure everything that you have is correct and supposed to work together. And if that's still the case, then you're going to need something like an actual spacer. I don't recommend stacking a bunch of shims behind the bearing, because the way that that bearing locates itself, or that assembly locates itself, is with a register onto the front of the transmission case. And anything over about 150 thousandths, it starts to lose that register or that interface, and then it can kind of move around on the bolts and become off center and cause wear on the bearing, cause the bearing to make noise. It can actually cause the levers and bearing to basically slide across each other as it spins, which can sometimes cause a squealing noise or something like that. So if you have a number that is pretty big, again, check everything first, make sure everything's right, and if it is, then we're going to want to put a spacer behind this thing to make sure that it's right.